Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and there's a couple red wiggler bins that have not been checked in on for 10 days now. 10 days since they were last fed. It's these two down here on the bottom. The one on the right, as you can see, is the population that I referred to as my original worms. And I guess the age is left to right, the older of the two bins, 111 days old, and the younger, the one with the original worms in it, 93 days old. And there's been 10 feedings and 7 feedings respectively. And it seems like they're probably due for a quick check-in and feeding. I've got some corn, I've got some broccoli. So let's get them up on the bench and get them fed. The stuff I bought down here for them consists of some broccoli stems and some corn cobs. And you'll even see one of the cobs of corn still has all of the kernels on it. These were just discarded because there was clear damage. So those were never cooked or fed to humans. But everything was frozen and is still pretty much frozen. And we're going to divvy this up evenly between the two systems. Here we already have the older of the two systems out on the bench. Going to evict this wormy off the plastic. I guess if I see a number of them, we could just fold the plastic in half so it'll just sort of hang on to its humidity there off on the side. What have we here? Top covering paper's kind of holding up pretty good. I've had much more heavily worn top paper coverings that I just continued to use in that same capacity. So I think this one's still in fairly decent shape, and we'll probably just continue using it that way when we cover up. One thing I didn't notice, and maybe it just stuck to the bottom of that newspaper, maybe there was a feeding zone indicator. Tradition in my worm bins is to mark where we last fed. In most cases, I'm just feeding down the middle. And who knows, maybe there was a coffee filter attached to the bottom of that piece of newspaper. I'm not sure. I'm not going to worry about it. The moisture level, wow, very good moisture in here. I guess being covered with plastic, that is one of the key benefits, because you're not losing much, if any, moisture to evaporation. I mean, around the plastic you're going to lose some for sure, but everything that's underneath it has sort of a terrarium effect, where any moisture that would otherwise vaporize out of the system is sort of captured by the plastic covering, where it condenses and drops back down as droplets of dew right back down into the bin. Usually you got a worm or two right there waiting to collect, oops, waiting to collect up the moisture in those cases. All right, let me go grab that half of a nut before I forget it over there. It's actually not a nut, it's a seed. It's the seed from an avocado. It was soft enough to break, so I broke it. It's weird, it's so crumbly, it's almost chalky when it finally does begin to disintegrate. And I would assume that it's easier for the wormies to have at it if it's in little particles like this, so let's give them a nice avocado seed snack. I don't know if the avocado goes back to the previous feeding from 10 days ago. Seems unlikely, because usually it would take an avocado seed like that a great deal of time to break down to that point where it's that fragile and easy to break. So that thing's probably been in here for a while. C, the letter C, cauliflower. For some reason I'm thinking, yeah, cantaloupe and cauliflower was what the last feeding consisted of. That's the reason I didn't really expect to see many leftovers of it. Although there could be. Maybe that's why they're all mobbing here down in the feeding area, nibbling on whatever leftovers there are. Here and there when I encounter something that's kind of jumbled up, I just, out of force of habit anymore, I guess, tend to try to break it up a little bit. Although in these younger bins, and yeah, I suppose I would still consider a 111-day-old bin relatively young anymore, considering I'm pushing my current bins up to ages somewhere in the neighborhood of twice that anymore. Doesn't mean I need to. I mean, if I were to run out of space in any of my systems, then naturally I'm not going to force anything. Try to jam food in there that won't fit, or run myself out of room to work. So that's not what I generally like to do. Although you'll see when we get to the next system, I must have been super generous in that system with bedding, building it up and building it up, because there it does feel like we're already kind of running out of space, even though it's only been fed 7 times over there, and it's not even 100 days old. So I've got my restocked box of leaves from outside, which I thought we'd be really generous with today. So I dropped in a couple handfuls there. Feels awfully dry though. I mean, granted the material in the system's got a good moisture level, but I think just to play it safe, I'm going to grab my water bottle and we're going to squirt this down. My water bottle's definitely running low, but hopefully it's got just enough in there to allow us to dampen this material, or at least contribute enough moisture to offset the dryness, so that the dry materials don't end up sort of sucking the moisture into themselves from the neighboring materials. Just give a little bit of moisture of its own, and maybe it won't try to rob moisture from its neighbors. Alright, so I do have a little bit of worm chow we can include in here too. So let's drop that in. Another food supplement. Not so much the food, but the food supplement is the grit that helps them eat their foods. And I really love the idea of maybe putting even more in here so that we can only use a little tiny bit to get things covered up here. I'd really like today's feeding to be primarily bedding and a bunch of it. But not only leaves, I mean, we could use a little bit more leafy material. Sprinkle a little bit more in here. Somehow some paper seems like it would be a good thing too. No? Yeah, I think so. Well, some paper we could drop in is this newspaper. A couple chunks of newspaper. And I've got a couple napkins too. Here's one that we can drop in too. And I suppose once again, along those same lines of thinking, since this stuff's all going in dry, why don't we just dampen it a little bit at least, so that if nothing else, maybe it'll prevent it from sucking up moisture from the nearby neighboring materials. Alright, I don't think we need to go much beyond that. These feedings they've been getting lately, maybe they're just not that big because you don't really see leftovers. Maybe because, you know, if you're going to give them cantaloupe and cauliflower stems, you're probably not going to want to expect to see leftover. It's probably completely natural that after 10 days they've left no leftovers of those sort of foods. And, you know, the foods they're getting today, the broccoli stem will be the same way. They're just not going to leave anything of that if we were to come back another 10 days from now. However, those corn cobs, they're definitely going to leave leftovers. Those things take quite some time, so I think we can certainly expect to see leftovers next time we come in here. I'm just going to do a quick assessment of this outer edge. Usually these systems where we feed down the middle, it's never fed on the outer edges, and the only stuff that ever makes its way out to the outer edges is just all the finished castings keep getting pushed out. It's really nice out here, and even though we're not feeding these outer edges, somehow the worms always really like being out here. I like scattering in a little bit of loose bedding here and there just so that it's not like so densely castings out there, so that maybe some of the worms that are hanging out there for whatever reason also at the same time continue whittling down some of the materials that need that sort of treatment. I think having the plastic coverings definitely brings with it the benefit of the extra moisture. You don't get these little dry spots. Everything just seems to have a good consistent moisture level to it. So I'm seeing really no good reason to stop running with the plastic coverings. This is the oldest of my, well, no, everything older, how do I say that? Every bin that's older than this has one way or another been switched over to a covering that's something other than plastic, a cardboard or paper or something like that. So this is the oldest of my bins that still has a plastic covering on it to protect it from losing its moisture. But there's a lot of casting material piling up in here, and I bet the system would do quite well even if it didn't have a plastic covering to help it. But just for good measure, we're going to return it the way we found it. And hopefully we applied our dry and damp stuff, our dry leaves, dry paper, plus the moisture, the water itself, in a good ratio, in a good combination, so that we don't end up tipping the scales, because I do like the moisture content of this bin. I wasn't looking to increase it by much. I was just looking to maintain what's here now. All right, let's go get the original worms, the 93-day-old system. Uh-oh. Should I be really technical? It looks like I've got myself a stowaway from the other bin. Uh-oh, where did he go? Now he's on the plastic. Am I going to allow a foreign wormy from another system into the original worms population? I don't see why not. It's not like I'm trying to preserve some sort of a gene pool here. It's really just a, I don't know, what's the right way to think about it? Sort of a, ooh, wow, this paper is really worn. I guess there's just a certain amount of novelty, to me at least, in having at least a small sample of the original worms that I originally started out with in the very beginning. Do you think we should try laying this out one more time and using it as a top covering? It seems extremely fragile. You know what? I think it's due for an upgrade. We'll just recycle. How does that sound? Anything else we could recycle off the top that's a little bit dry around the edges where there's no plastic can also be a nice foundation for today's feeding. Place all that stuff that's just been sitting out there semi-neglected and dry and include it with today's feeding. So we can do what we did in the other bin, just go for the center, see how the previous feeding's holding up, if at all. Probably going to be no sign of it, although cantaloupe sometimes leaves behind some of its rind. That stuff is a little bit tougher, and sometimes the worms are unable to break it down in only 10 days. This is like cardboard or paper or something. So I wouldn't be surprised if we did bump into a little bit of cantaloupe rind in here. Looks like we're also bumping into a fair bit of bedding. Leaves, maybe paper, and here's the cantaloupe rind right there, right there. You see more of it here. Lots of little tiny worms hanging out in this bin. That's always something I really like to see when I'm checking my original worms, my population of original worms. Because I'll tell you, maybe a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago now, this population started out as just a handful of worms, really. We've gradually worked their numbers up nicely. And I think it's because I wanted to see their numbers continue to increase. That's probably some of the main reasons I've been perhaps a little bit more generous on their bedding by building their environment out a little bit more than I might have in other systems. I think we're just going to continue with that trend here. It doesn't matter to me if we run out of space and it's time to just let them forage down what remains and then move them. We'll do that. But I think there is a certain advantage to having extra real estate, especially for worms that you're trying to promote the breeding of. So I think we're going to see about being really generous with bedding over here for these guys too. I think that approach of adding dry stuff, if that's kind of what you have on hand, and then balancing it with a little bit of a squirt of moisture, I think it's a really good way to preserve a moisture level that you're really satisfied with. And I'm really satisfied with the moisture level throughout this system. Everything feels nice and damp and, you know, easily broken down because of its dampness. You know, stuff that's a little bit dry off the surface has all been dropped down into the hole here. Why don't we grab ourselves a little bit of leafing material to start with. A couple handfuls again, sort of like we did in the other bin. And I'm hoping that we could still squeeze a little bit more moisture out of this bottle before it runs out. We might be back in here in a week, right? Because if we wanted to celebrate the system's 100-day birthday, that's a week from today. We could certainly do that. I'm not sure if a check-in a week from now is going to be absolutely necessary. I mean, I'm sure that the broccoli we're giving them will probably be nowhere to be found. The corn will still be here as leftovers, but it might be a suitable time to give them more food, something easy to eat. I don't know. We'll see. Well, The replacement top covering paper is a little bit rough looking, a little rough around the edges in places, but it'll be suitable for getting things here covered up. But before we cover up, we'll just take some of this additional newspaper. Oh, there's a few more chunks of it that I tore up that we can include down here as bedding too. On top of the leaves here too, why don't we just give this stuff a little squirt. Certainly don't think it takes a lot of water to dampen a couple small sheets of paper like that. But I think we're probably in better shape and have a much better chance of keeping the moisture as is in the system if we do this. And here too, I think it makes good sense to keep on covering things up. It seems to be working quite nicely in here. The worms seem to be very comfortable. They were just all over the place in that bedding we saw earlier. And I think before we cover up, it would make good sense to give them a little bit more to play in, right? This is, like I said before, a system that's starting to approach a level that I sort of consider to be at capacity, because as you can see, I do like to push things up to the side sometimes and move things around, have a little bit of space without feeling so cramped that I can't do things because I'm running out of space due to the capacity. So, we could, I don't know, scale back on some of our additions of bedding going forward. I think even last time too, we were a little bit more, oops, that's it, we're almost out of water. We're just pushing air at this point. That's all they get. So, yeah, I think last time too, we kind of scaled back. We held back on giving them more bedding here because we already knew that we were nearing capacity. We didn't want to just like go crazy and run out of space. 1, 2, 3. Although, I've been kind of wondering if that is the wrong school of thought. A lot of people, I think, actually load up their containers to capacity right up to the rim and then just cut the worms loose on all of it. Me, I kind of gradually work up the level of the system's contents gradually, a little bit of bedding here, a little bit of bedding there on each occasion, versus just trying to start big right from the start. Might be an interesting thing to try. I mean, that's a good example right there. If you're that close to the rim, any little mishap could just end up in overflow, stuff flying out of the bin. Part of the reason I don't like operating so close to the rim, I like having a little bit of a safety barrier surrounding my sloppy work. Not bad. I can see little chunks of like bedding and this and that floating around down here within the system, down in these castings, and boy oh boy are these castings nice. Just love the way everything flows in this thing. All the material just has this very loose, granular feel to it. Hopefully that's what we find on the opposite side. I have no reason to think otherwise. But before we put things away here, I just generally like to take a peek at how things are doing throughout. Here it seems like there's larger chunks and more of it, of this bedding material floating around. So that's cool too. I didn't feel so compelled to try to mix stuff in. This stuff already has stuff mixed in all over the place. So I think we were already starting into doing that in here too already. So yeah, considering this thing hasn't even had 10 feedings yet, it's amazing that we're this close to the rim. And that is the way it would be if I were to, for example, switch over to trying to run my systems with much more material to begin with, and just in general with a payload that's closer to the container's actual capacity versus working my way up to that. Something I've thought about trying. I bet it would work well. But for now, we're just going to continue with what we're doing here. Maybe in this system, maybe we'll scale back the amount of bedding we add just to make sure we don't reach that overflow point too soon, so the system can run for a while. But there's nothing that says that the system has to run for a long time, I mean, if we run out of space, we've run out of space, and that's that, right? And you got to do what you got to do. All right, everyone, so that's it. We're done feeding our 2 red wiggler bins, number 11 feeding and number 8 feeding down here. And I guess maybe we'll wait another week, maybe we'll wait another 10 days. But these systems definitely seem capable enough to handle pretty frequent check-ins if we were to do so. So we'll play it by ear, and we'll see when we're back in here next. So that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Oops, I got myself a little bit dirty there. I got a little bit of cleaning up to do and putting away things. stuff that's boring, which I'm not going to keep you around for. But before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. As always, if you did, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And also, if you haven't done so, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks again for watching. Bye now.